Hello, welcome back to Painting with Artie Julie. Today we're going to be looking at this fun scene, a little scarecrow. It's based on the one at my allotment, but you can draw him in any shape or whatever clothes you want to. It's great fun to do. Don't forget that there are the instruction sheets and the cheat sheet available on my website artiejulie.com, and you can also subscribe to the YouTube channel. Right, let's get going. Okay, so we're going to draw out this little scarecrow first of all. It doesn't really matter about the shape of it because they're going to be all odd shapes. I've taken inspiration for this picture off the scarecrows at the allotment. People do tend to put scarecrows up there, and it's just for fun really. I don't think they frighten any birds off, but I thought we'd just try and draw one out. So you just want a circle for the head, another big circle for the stomach, a straight line going across there because we're going to put a pole or a broom or something on there. The sleeves will be tied back to that, so they'll just go on sort of dangling off this pole across the top here. And then a pair of trousers, which again you just want a couple of lines down, and again they'll be gathered at the bottom here because they'll be full of stuffing. So peculiar shape person really, just giving them a bit of an idea of what you're going to do. Perhaps we'll put a hat on them, slightly jaunty angle. Again, that'll all be full of stuffing, so that'll be around like that somehow. And you can just add little bits onto them. You could do all sorts of different shape ones. You could do a slimmer one with a coat tied in at the middle there if you wanted to, or flaring out, or you could just lots of different shapes you could do with this. So it's just a bit of fun to start with. I always tend to do my drawings on a scrap piece of paper first, so I can transfer it over, so I'm not doing all my rubbing out on my pristine watercolour paper. So once I've got the scarecrow there, I'm going to think I want a few flowers of some sort into the background. You might get a big leaf or two down the bottom here, perhaps a rhubarb leaf or something like that, something nice and bold and striking down the bottom here. So perhaps draw a few of those on, and perhaps stick another one or two of those over this side because they help to fill the spaces up a little bit. And perhaps a plant or two, nice bit of height to it. Might be some foxgloves or little things on this side, but perhaps a sunflower or a flower or two of this shape over there. But again, at this stage, just really positioning things that will look right on the picture and not into a great deal of detail with it. But I think something like that will do. Perhaps his head's a little bit big, so make that a little bit smaller. So that's my drawing done. So now how do I get it onto the piece of paper? I'm going to scribble all over the back with a soft pencil. Perhaps put it onto a clean piece of paper first so it doesn't transfer over. So all over the back, or with a graphite stick, which is a lot easier to cover with, something like a 4B or a 6B. Don't use charcoal because that just goes too messy. And then I can make sure I've got it all covered, a little bit more at the top there. I can turn it back over onto my watercolour paper. This is Bockingford. I think it's a 300 gram weight watercolour paper this time. And you can just go back over your lines a little bit more precisely. Then your pencil breaks. Let's use another pencil. So just going back over the lines again to get the main lines on there, and just check, make sure it's transferring over. Yeah, you don't want it too dark. Just have the centres of those in, and I can do things with that in a moment, so know where those are going to go. few of these leaves again, just trying to get the positions roughly in there. I can alter this as I build the picture up and put different things on there. Put a little face on there as well if you want to. Give them a bit of personality. So it transfers over, and now as I've just extended beyond my drawing now and put a broom handle or something on here. And perhaps the other end of the handle sticking out there. And now we're ready to paint. So we're going to start with the background first. You always start with your weakest, wettest washes first of all. So we're going to put those on in a moment. If you want the instruction sheets, you can download them off the website, artyjulie.com, and that might help you out with the drawing as well. I'll put a drawing on there for you so you can download that as well if you need to, but you should be able to draw those out yourself. Right, so we're going to work with the background. What sort of colours we're going to put into the background? We want the greens, we want a little bit of flowery colours in there, we want the greens down here, perhaps a bit of browns down the bottom. So I'm going to mix up a bit of the greeny colour. We can have a puddle of yellow, just a bit of, I don't know, cadmium yellow would be nice for that, or a mid-yellow of some sort. Because my brush was grubby, that's got a nice green already. And then cadmium yellow and ultramarine blue to make a greeny colour. I tend not to use a pre-mixed green because I think it can vary your shades of the green a lot more easily if you mix it up with a blue and a yellow. Perhaps a slightly different shade of green, one with a bit more blue into it as well, but I'll just keep that to one side of that mix at the moment. A little bit of burnt sienna perhaps for the ground. That's gone very grubby. I'll just clean that palette out and just put a new blob of that in there to make a nice bit of browny colour. So to start with, we're just going to wet this background. So taking my mop brush. It doesn't really matter if you overlap the Scarecrow as well a little way, but I'm just trying to leave the basics of him dry. Flick this water away so it goes way off your paper, off the edge there. So we're not going to paint that far, but make sure the water goes beyond where you're going to paint so it stays nice and wet around the Scarecrow himself. So it doesn't really matter if you wobble a bit and go over him, but make sure that the water goes off the paper, otherwise you get a hard line where the water stops. So we want to keep this soft so it blurs into the background around here. So making sure that's staying wet. I have my board slightly tilted, but also I tilt it and move it around a bit so I can see where it's sitting in a puddle or where it's dry patches on there. So I just want a nice even coating of that all over. Because then we're going to go for it then. Big brush to start with, something like a 12 or a 14 round. And I'm just going to drop in some of the yellowy colours, just a little bit of the yellow colour coming up here, randomly thinking leaf shapes. Whatever you do one side of a scarecrow's arm, bring it down so it comes out the other. A little bit over those leaves as well. Then some more greeny colours, again coming over those leaves, in between his legs there. A little bit of green. Just putting random shapes, just think leaf shapes really. At this stage it doesn't matter if it runs a bit. And just let it blur off. This is why you need the water way off the piece of paper so it blurs on these edges, so you don't get a sharp line. Keep it a little bit tidier up around the edge of the Scarecrow himself, and just let it just bleed away into the background. Just put that bit of green as that leaf overlaps his leg there. And as long as that stays wet, you can keep playing with those colours, pushing them around a bit. And then a bit of burnt sienna, reddish brown colour, for a bit of earth down the bottom. So between his legs here, just down the bottom here. We give a little bit of the browny colour. Perhaps put a blob or two of that in there as well. Give a bit of variation. I'm just going to dry my brush, lift out any little puddles or where it's overlapping the sleeves a little way, and then we'll have to leave it to dry for a few moments. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that to dry. Or you can dry it with a hairdryer if you want to as well at this stage. Okay, so that's nice and dry now, so we can get on to putting some of the shaping into the Scarecrow. You could go straight in with the colours and then put the shaping in afterwards, but I quite like to put my shadows in first. So for this I'm just going to use some ultramarine blue, just ultramarine blue on its own. And if you want a soft shadow, like round the face here, if you think the light's coming from the top downwards, this side of the body and the face and all that will be in shadow down here. So if you want a soft shadow, you need to dampen the area first and then put in a little bit of the shading around the side of the face there to give it the little bit of shadow. You can then dry your brush and just use that dampness to allow you to blend that shadow out a little bit. We can then cover that and flood it with colour a bit later on, and that will give you the shading into the one side of the face there. So I'm going to just put a little bit more shading onto this hat. So same sort of thing, it's because it's been stuffed full of straw or newspaper, it's quite a rounded shape to it. So I'll give that emphasis on the rounded shape by putting the shadow to the one side, perhaps across the band there, and perhaps down the side of this hat, across the middle. And again, you can just dry your brush and model that shaping. It's quite a useful thing to do, just to model that shaping, or put a bit of darker on the one side of it. Again, the belly is a big round shape to it, so I'm just going to dampen that only with a small brush, just putting the water on first, and then this ultramarine blue just under the armpits and down round over the belly to help him look like that very round shape that he gets there onto those bits. Sleeves, similar sort of thing. Wet that one. You can do two at once if you manage to keep those both damp at the same time. And then a little bit of shaping just into where the cuffs are, under the arm, let it blend out. And then again, just clean your brush and just feather it back. So when this is dry, we can just flood it with the colours that we want to use afterwards. I think with the trousers, they're probably a bit sharper creases to them in some places. So this I'm going to put onto dry paper. The shadows here are going to go onto dry paper because there'll be a little bit sharper folds in some places, because there'll be the old creases from the trousers where they're pulled tight around the legs there. So they'll go onto dry paper, so you get sharper marks with those, giving them definite shapes to the shadows onto there. I'm just softening those a little bit, it's a bit strong on that one. And again, that will help to give it its three-dimensional look, make that a little bit stronger and darker into this area. Perhaps a line or two for where the belt's going to go round. So while that's drying now, we can get on to doing some more work with the background. And these we can just paint straight onto the dry paper now. We can start to build up the shapes in the background here with the flowers. So you want a few little sunflowers. So we can go straight on with some nice bright cadmium yellow. Just painting on a few little petals. It is more of an illustration, so we're not doing a botanical painting of these sunflowers. We are just adding in little flowers, shapes. So I'm not worrying too much about the accuracy of every petal on here. Just using my brush to create the shape of the sunflower. Perhaps we have another one, perhaps a little saucer shaped one, just slightly on its side, so they'll be longer on the outside edges, sorry, the top and bottom, and shorter as they come up the side here. Just use your brush to make the petal shapes. And another little one here. Perhaps we'll have this one just bending over. Just go over the background colour. It doesn't matter if it blends into it a little bit. So that'll give me a few little sunflowers in a moment or two. We'll put some leaves onto them in a moment on the centres. We can do all sorts of other little things around here. We can use some little bits of pink, because that'd be quite nice to do some little campions or foxgloves or little flowers which are coming up in little clusters like this, adding a bit of colour to your picture. I don't think foxgloves are out at the same time as sunflowers normally, but hey ho, they'll add a little interest into your picture, into the background. Just adding a bit of colour, and just as many of those as you like. Perhaps we just add a little bit more greens to some of these leaves, letting some of the background colours show through, because it is a greeny colour already. So a bit of the yellowy green, perhaps have another one coming out here, a bit of bluey green. And a bit more green somewhere into that leaf. These leaves won't really start to stand out until we do a bit of the background into this, the darker bits into it, but we can just add a little bit of extra colour and shape into these various greens, so it's not all the same colour, so a bit of yellowy green and then a bit of bluey greens into it as well, and leaving some little gaps in there so you'll get the background showing through to give you lighter patches onto the leaves. A bit of yellowy green on first, and then a bit of the darker bluey green into that as well. And again, just letting that background colour show through a little way. And just making this up as you're going along, really. We're now going to put in some little leaves onto the sunflowers as well, to give those a hint of a leaf. So these sunflowers, they have these heart-shaped leaves on there, so you can just add a leaf or two. I don't worry too much about the stems, we're just tickling on a few little hint of leaf, just a little hint of the stem there, coming down in between those leaves, so you don't want it too detailed into this background area, because otherwise it will distract from the scarecrow itself. I know you said snowman then, but it isn't that time of year yet, is it? So it's a scarecrow, it's autumny scarecrow look to it. But saying these, you just put whatever you like into the background here. It's just adding a little bit of interest to it. Don't make them too strong though, those leaves. I was just about to put it on a little bit too strong there, because you want it to be background. You just want a hint of something there without it being too deliberate. Little clusters of leaves coming down there. Perhaps we put a few little fainter bits of flowers into the background, little weaker washes with those. Perhaps a little hint of some sort of leaf or something growing in the background here to match this side. Slightly different shade of green there. Doesn't have to have flowers on it. Just a few patches to give a bit of interest there. Right, okay, so we need to do a little bit more work on that in a few moments. We need to work some darker bits into it in places. But before that, let's put the colouring onto the Scarecrow himself. This has got to be nice and dry now, which it is. Oh, before we get onto that, I'll just put the middles into those sunflowers. I forgot about those. A bit of burnt umber. And just put that little bit of dark into the centres of the sunflowers. Just dot it on. If there's the odd little light patch showing through, it doesn't matter at all. Again, the same as this one. Just a little bit of dark into that one there to give it the centres of the sunflowers. Right, okay. Scarecrow itself now, and you can use whatever colours you want to for these. I'd used a little bit of raw sienna or yellow ochre for the face. So just mixing up a little bit of a puddle of that. So just going over the face, straight over that bit of shadow. I haven't bothered wetting it first because it's only a small area, and then you'll see that that shadow becomes part of the shaping. It's magic. This watercolour is translucent, so it allows you to see the colours through. As I've still got that on my brush, I use that for around his waistband. Again, going over the shadows, and it allows those shadows to just give me the shaping for his little bit of the waistband there. Just onto the dry paper, but always load your brush with paint when you're doing that. Just pause for a minute, make sure that that's dry. Before you do his hat, what colour should I do his hat? Should we have it a purpley colour? I happen to have a little bit of a violet colour here, but you could mix it up with a bit of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson to give you a purple, but I happen to have a bit of purple just left there. And again, just going over his hat, over that shadowy bit. And you'll see it naturally goes a bit darker where it goes over the shadows. Just onto the dry paper there to give you the shape with that one. And I'm just going to dry my brush, lift a little bit of that out on that lighter side, so it just gives me a little bit more shaping onto the hat there, and perhaps even just get a little bit of stronger and drop that into the shadowy bit while that's still wet to give me a bit of extra shaping onto the hat. The shirt wants some colour. Let's have a nice bright red colour for that, so we can do a nice bit of cadmium red. Let's mix a puddle of up. Cadmium red is very strong, or a vermilion or something like that sort of colour, so just be a little bit careful, it can overpower your picture slightly. I'm going to leave a little bit of a shape there for a neckerchief or something like that on him, and again just doing one patch at a time. Just go over the shadows onto the dry paper now. Just load your brush, carefully going around the edges there. So we just do the sleeve, over the shadowy bits. Dry your brush and lift out a little bit of light on top of the arms there. Just dry your brush, lift it out a little bit to give me a little bit of lighter, a little bit darker onto it. Again, do the same with the other one now. Going to do that while it's still wet, so over the shadows that I've previously put on there, down over that, dry my brush, lift out a little bit on the top there to give me a lighter bit on the top, and then the main colour comes onto the rest of the arms there. And again, last bit now, over his big round belly. Load your brush with paint, so you're painting with a puddle of paint. Always when you're doing watercolours, you're painting with a puddle of paint. Even if you're using a small brush, it shouldn't be at this stage putting it onto this with dry brush strokes. You could load a puddle, so you're putting a puddle of paint on, dragging that puddle across the picture, down over his tummy, and then you can just dry your brush, take any puddles out that may be sitting there, and lighten it again before it gets too dry with the top part there. Trousers, we're going to do the same. Again, we'll just use the ultramarine blue. Make a puddle of that. So I can do the same sort of thing with that, straight over the trousers, over those shadows, which will instantly go a bit darker because of the nature of the watercolour. Just dragging that down. Don't rub it too much because it will start to lift the shadows underneath down to where it meets the floor. Again, just take out a little bit of light in some places and let that settle in. This side, same thing again, go straight down that leg. Working either side of the little leaf that you've got down the bottom here, dragging this puddle down as you go. Down over the trouser bottoms. And lifting out any bits that you want a bit lighter with your, just dry your brush and lift out a little bit to give you a bit of shaping there. What else can we do with him? We can put a little bit of neckerchief on once this is dry up here, and go back in with the yellow ochre perhaps. Probably need a little bit of darker in that as well to make it the shape working right. So we've just got to wait until that's dry before we can put the rest of the details on. I think he might be dry around the top of his face here, so we can add in a little bit of hair, yellow ochre, put that coming out from bits of straw perhaps coming out from underneath his hat, a little bit of burnt umber as well, make it a bit darker. Just adding in a few little bits of fun details onto him now. We'll have a bit of orange and a bit of yellow and red to make an orangey colour to give me a little triangle shape for his nose, a little bit of a carrot perhaps. We'll have that same colour, put on a little row of dots for a little bit of a smile. These would probably be buttons or something like that sewn on there, so make them quite deliberate little dots there. A nice bit of dark ultramarine blue and burnt umber, put a couple of little dots for his eyes. Bit of shaping onto his nose there. I'm going to use a burnt umber again, just put a little bit of shaping around his neckerchief. We could put on some stripes onto his shirt, couldn't we? Make it into a little bit of a tartan shirt. And just doing just weak colours, just put a few little almost like dotted lines around here, just give him a bit of detail into that. A few little stripes going about across there, make them follow the sags in the shirt. And follow the line of these tartan. Little line down and some buttons down here for the front of the shirt. Just be careful, it's still slightly damp, so I'm just being a little bit cautious with that. And again with this now, just emphasising that round shape. Just follow a few little detail lines down. A few across. So as much little details with that as you want to, really. A broom handle, we better put a broom handle onto it, haven't we? A bit of the burnt umber. We've got a bit of burnt umber mixed up here. So just putting a little bit of a line straight onto the dry paper with the burnt umber. That will come straight out the other end. And for the broom handle, or the brush part of it. And a few little bristles. coming out the end there. I'm just going to get a bit of burnt umber ultramarine blue to make a little bit of a darker tone. We can add in a few little extra bits of dark with those, perhaps just under the edge of the broom handle here, just to give it a bit more shading and shape. A few bristles with that as well. So I think that's probably enough for the Scarecrow, but it does look like he's floating in midair. We haven't got any depth into him at all around this area. So the thing we have to do now is work back into this background a little bit more, adding some shadows and darker areas into the part around the bottom here. So I'm going to mix a puddle up of ultramarine blue and burnt umber, which gives me a very strong dark. And in some areas we're going to work in the shadowy bits, and some areas I'll just put it straight onto the dry paper. So this is working the bits in between the leaves, either side of the Scarecrow himself, in between some of these flowers. As you come out into higher areas, lighter areas, just put a bit of water on first and then bring the paint up, or bring the water down into that little bit of shadow so it fades back again. I'll show you that in a bigger area in a moment, but let's just put a bit more onto this part. Please just go onto the dry bits, a bit more into this area. But where we want it to fade away, you're going to put a little bit of clean water on and just fade that shadow out so it doesn't look too harsh. So this area in between his legs now, you want to get that darker, but you want it to fade back again. So onto this bottom bit here where you want the shadow to fade away, I'm going to put a nice patch of water. Then I'm going to get the ultramarine blue, burnt umber, bring it down in between his legs here, so it's nice and strong and dark. Bringing that down underneath his feet, and then where it touches this little bit patch of water, I'm just going to let that fade away and just make it a bit more uneven. So this is water down here, so you can just see it blurring off down that edge, so it's not too strong and sharp. Just need to do that in a few more areas around the side here. Bit of clean water on down here. It should be right onto the dry paper. It should just sit there without leaving a line. And then bringing that dark around the edge of the flower and touching it up to that water to let it be the shadows underneath the plants and things there. I didn't get that dark enough there, I just took it off again. There we go. So just little places here and there. So it's easy enough, it's a little closed area, but as soon as it comes back, we need to fade it back out into the background by just putting a little bit of water on, and a little bit down this one in between those leaves, and that just seats him in, makes it look a little bit stronger, perhaps just a little bit of darker. I might just use some darker greens here just to give this a bit more depth in the bottom part, just touching it in between the little flowers up to the trouser leg, just to make it a little bit darker around the edge there. So pretty well done. I'm just going to flick on a little bit of extra shaping in one or two places just to bring him out a little bit more. And if you wanted to, you can just have a bit of fun with this, and you could flick some paint on or do a bit of mad spattering over the bottom just to give it a bit of life with the colours that you've been using before, a little bit of the reds and the browns and the, just to give it a hint of something, and the greens down here. Make it look a bit more earthy. If there's anything when you're doing spattering, just have a piece of tissue ready in case you don't want it everywhere. And that's about it.